The Meridian Station security complex represented the absolute pinnacle of galactic paranoia disguised as public safety. Sprawling across 14 sublevel processing centers and employing roughly half the hegemony's most obsessively detail-oriented species, it had achieved the remarkable feat of making interdimensional travel less convenient than filing taxes in 17 different temporal zones simultaneously. The station's architects, a collective of beings whose idea of relaxation involved organizing their leisure time into color-coded spreadsheets, had designed a security system so comprehensive that it could theoretically detect if someone had harbored an impure thought about jaywalking 3-star systems ago. Whether this level of scrutiny actually prevented crime or simply made criminals more creative remained a subject of heated academic debate, though most scholars agreed that the real crime was a 2-hour average processing time. Echo approached processing Bay 12 with the resigned expression of someone who had learned not to expect logic from bureaucracy, regardless of which species was running it. She moved with that distinctly human gait that somehow managed to suggest both casual indifference and barely contained lethality, a combination that made most aliens wonder if humans practiced looking dangerous in mirrors or if it just came naturally with the species. Individual designation. Please approach the preliminary assessment matrix, announced Senior Processing Technician Voxthaler, whose species had evolved from creatures that looked like filing cabinets had mated with particularly judgmental crystals. The crystalline archive keepers took documentation more seriously than most species took breathing, which made them perfect for security work and absolutely terrible at parties. Echo stepped up to the assessment station, already reaching for her equipment harness. Experience had taught her that cooperation, while philosophically irritating, usually resulted in less paperwork later, and paperwork was the one thing in the universe that could make her genuinely violent. State your designation, species classification, homeworld registry, and purpose of transit, Voxthaler intoned, his crystalline form shifting through various spectrum analyses that probably told him more about her molecular composition than she knew herself. Echo. Human. Earth. Sol System, Terran Federation. Shore leave, she replied in the tone of someone who had given this exact information roughly 1,000 times and was getting tired of it. Voxthaler's partner, processing specialist Cliffhanger, whose species resembled what would happen if an accountant had been crossed with a very serious squid, consulted his datapad with the enthusiasm of someone reading technical manuals for fun. Human designation confirmed. However, our records indicate that human transit procedures require enhanced scrutiny following the incidents. What incidents? Echo asked, though her tone suggested she probably already knew the answer and wasn't going to like it. Multiple reports of humans engaging in what our analysts have classified as statistically improbable survival scenarios followed by unprecedented escalation of localized conflict parameters, Cliffhanger explained in the carefully neutral voice of someone reading from an official report that had been sanitized to remove all the interesting parts. Echo sighed. You mean the thing where humans don't die when they are supposed to, and then make it everyone else's problem? That is a surprisingly accurate summary of our 57-page analysis, Voxthaler admitted, consulting his own datapad. Please remove all weapons, armor, cybernetic enhancements, medical devices, good luck charms, and anything that could be construed as potentially hazardous to station security or the local space-time continuum. Define potentially hazardous, Echo said, already unbuckling what appeared to be a standard military equipment harness, though something about the way she wore it suggested it contained more than the regulation number of ways to end someone's day. Anything capable of causing harm to persons, property, station infrastructure, or the fundamental laws of physics, Cliffhanger read from his regulations manual. Echo paused in her unbuckling. You might want to be more specific about that last one. What followed could only be described as the galaxy's most methodical demonstration of why human military doctrine made absolutely no sense to anyone else in the universe. Echo began removing equipment with the systematic precision of someone dismantling something that might explode if handled incorrectly, which, given the hardware emerging from her person, wasn't entirely theoretical. First came the obvious items, a rifle that looked like it had been designed by someone who had confused elegant engineering solutions with making sure the target knows they've been thoroughly disapproved of. Then a sidearm that appeared to hum with barely contained enthusiasm for violence. Then another sidearm. Then what might have been a backup for the backup, though at this point the distinction was becoming academic. Curious weapon configuration, observed Clicksthainer, making notes on his datapad with the dedication of someone who genuinely believed that properly documenting chaos would eventually make it make sense. Our analysis of human military doctrine suggests a preference for redundancy, but this appears to exceed standard parameters. Standard parameters don't account for Tuesdays, Echo replied, producing what looked like a grenade that seemed to bend light around itself in ways that made the security sensors very nervous. Or Wednesdays. Also, never trust a Monday. The two processing specialists exchanged what might have been meaningful looks, though with their respective physiologies it was difficult to determine if they were communicating concern or simply experiencing simultaneous digestive issues. Please continue with the disarmament process, Vox Thaler requested, though his voice now carried a note of professional unease that suggested this was rapidly moving beyond his training parameters. Echo shrugged and kept going. A bandolier of devices that looked like they had been designed by someone with advanced degrees in both physics and spite. A collection of bladed weapons that appeared to have been forged from materials that shouldn't technically exist. A medical kit that apparently contained enough concentrated pharmaceuticals to either heal or accidentally transcend a medium-sized planet. The armor as well, please, Clicksthaner added, gesturing at what looked like standard-issue combat gear, though something about its construction suggested it had been modified by someone with strong opinions about personal safety and unlimited access to experimental materials. You sure? Echo asked. It's been a long flight, and the environmental controls on civilian transports are more of a suggestion than an actual feature. Regulations are quite explicit regarding the removal of all protective equipment during deep scan procedures. Echo sighed and began the process of removing her armor, revealing what appeared to be a standard undergarment configuration beneath. Nothing particularly noteworthy there. Most military personnel wore similar gear for environmental protection and comfort during extended operations. Now please step into the Comprehensive Biological and Augmentation Analysis Chamber, Vox Thaler instructed, gesturing toward what looked like a medical scanner that had been designed by someone with a PhD in making people uncomfortable and a minor in existential dread. The scanner hummed to life with a sort of sound that suggested it was either about to provide incredibly detailed medical information or accidentally achieve consciousness and immediately regret it. Advanced alien technology had a tendency toward the dramatic, apparently. For the first minute or so, everything proceeded according to standard protocol. Normal human physiology, typical bone density, expected organ configuration, standard metabolic readings. The sort of routine biological data that made security technicians everywhere wish they had pursued careers in something more stimulating, like monitoring paint as it dried or cataloging the emotional states of particularly boring rocks. Then the scanner encountered the scar tissue. Anomalous readings detected, Clicksthaner announced, though his voice had taken on the tone of someone who had just discovered that their boring job had suddenly become significantly less boring in ways they weren't entirely prepared for. The display screen lit up like a medical textbook, had decided to collaborate with a nightmare, and then invited all their friends to contribute. Scar tissue mapped across Echo's body in patterns that seemed to tell a story, assuming the story was being narrated by someone with extensive experience in creative approaches to mortality and a complete disregard for the supposed limitations of biological resilience. A jagged line across her left shoulder that looked like something with claws the approximate size and enthusiasm of construction equipment had attempted to perform impromptu surgery. A circular burn mark on her right arm that appeared to have been caused by exposure to temperatures typically associated with stellar cores or very angry stars. A series of parallel marks across her back that suggested she had been used as a scratching post by something roughly the size and disposition of a particularly irritated geological formation. These scarification patterns are... Vox Thaler began, then paused as his database attempted to process what it was seeing and apparently decided to take a coffee break instead. Our medical analysis systems are experiencing difficulty in categorizing the causative agents. Causative agents? Echo asked, though she sounded more curious than concerned. The weapons, creatures, or environmental hazards responsible for inflicting these injuries, Clicksthaner explained, his voice taking on the carefully controlled tone of someone who was beginning to suspect they might be in over their head and trying not to let it show. Our database contains comprehensive information on virtually every known threat type in the galaxy, but these patterns don't match any established categories. The scanner continued its work, revealing additional details that made the processing technicians increasingly uncomfortable with their career choices. Bone structure that had been fractured and healed in ways that suggested impacts beyond conventional physics. Tissue that had been damaged and regrown around areas that, according to their equipment, should have resulted in immediate and comprehensive biological failure. Neural pathways that had been rerouted around regions that the scanner insisted should have been incompatible with continued consciousness. The thermal damage pattern on your torso, Vox Thaler said slowly, consulting his readouts with the expression of someone who was hoping the numbers would change if he looked at them from a different angle, appears to correspond with theoretical models for exposure to divine class energy signatures. Echo raised an eyebrow. Divine class energy signatures. Energy patterns associated with entities of godlike power classifications, Thaner explained, though he sounded like he wasn't entirely convinced by his own explanation. According to our theoretical models, such exposure should result in immediate molecular dissociation, but your tissue appears to have not only survived the encounter, but developed adaptive responses. Hey, Echo said, examining her arm as if she had never particularly noticed the intricate web of scars that decorated it like some kind of cosmic calligraphy written in pain and stubbornness. That's interesting. The two processing specialists huddled together in rapid consultation, their conversation consisting of the sort of urgent technical jargon that usually preceded either breakthrough discoveries or complete professional breakdowns. Possibly both, in this case. Finally, Vox Thaler turned back to her with the expression of someone who had just realized that their routine day had taken a sharp turn into uncharted territory, and they hadn't brought a map. I need to ask you a direct question, and please understand that your response will determine how we proceed with your security classification. Go ahead. Have you ever engaged in direct combat with entities classified as divine or godlike beings? Echo considered this question with the sort of thoughtful deliberation most people reserved for choosing what to have for lunch, which was either very reassuring or absolutely terrifying, depending on your perspective. Define divine or godlike. Beings possessing power levels sufficient to manipulate fundamental forces of reality, typically worshipped by entire civilizations or species. Generally considered to exist beyond conventional physical limitations, and possessing near-omnipotent capabilities within their spheres of influence. Oh, Echo said, her expression brightening with recognition. You mean like Vorth A.K. the Eternal? Yeah, had a run-in with him about 6 months ago. Bit of a pompous ass, honestly. Really committed to the whole eternal torment aesthetic, but didn't seem to have much of a backup plan when the eternal part didn't work out. The silence that followed was the sort of silence that usually occurred right before something very significant happened, though it was difficult to predict whether that something would be enlightenment, complete psychological collapse, or possibly both simultaneously. You fought Vorth A.K. the Eternal, Thaner repeated slowly, as if saying it more carefully would somehow make it make more sense. Ford is probably too generous, Echo said. More like I disagreed with his approach to conflict resolution, and we had a philosophical discussion that got a little physical. Vox Thaler was frantically accessing his database with the desperate efficiency of someone who was hoping that more information would somehow make the situation less confusing. Vorth A.K. the Eternal is classified as a Class Omega universal threat. Our records indicate he is personally responsible for the eradication of 73 civilizations and the consumption of 19 star systems. The Hegemony Threat Assessment classifies engagement with this entity as requiring fleet-level military response with projected success probability of approximately 0.003%. Yeah. Well, your fleet probably doesn't have experience with philosophical discussions, Echo replied. Sometimes you just have to be willing to commit to your position, you know. Commit to your position, Vox Thaler repeated faintly. I punched him in what I assumed was his face until he stopped arguing with me. The scanner, apparently deciding that this conversation was beyond its technical specifications, completed its analysis with a cheerful beep that seemed thoroughly inappropriate for the existential crisis unfolding around it. Your scan results indicate multiple encounters with Class Omega entities, Thaner said, reading from his display with the tone of someone who was seriously questioning his life choices. Zix Thyss the Reality Render, Morthanel the Void Walker, and O.D. NYXothep the Universe Carver. That was a weird couple of months, Echo admitted. Universe Carver was probably the most challenging. Hard to have a proper philosophical discussion with something that exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Had to get creative with my argumentation techniques. Creative how? Vox Thaler asked, though his voice suggested he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know the answer. Turns out, if you hit them hard enough in the right combination of dimensions, you can convince them to consolidate into something more reasonable to debate with. Who knew dimensional physics could be so straightforward? Processing Supervisor THYSS Kavuk, whose species looked like someone had crossed a very official tree with an extremely disappointed librarian, approached the checkpoint with a sort of purposeful stride that suggested someone higher up the bureaucratic food chain had become involved, which was never a positive development in any administrative system. What is the nature of the processing delay? THYSS Kavok inquired, though his tone suggested he had already reviewed the preliminary reports and was not particularly looking forward to the detailed explanation. We have a human individual with extensive combat experience involving Class Omega entities, Vox Thaler explained. Our standard processing protocols do not include provisions for individuals whose threat classification potentially exceeds our defensive capabilities. THYSS Kavok examined the scan results with the expression of someone who was trying to determine whether he was looking at medical data or the plot summary of a particularly implausible action movie. These injury patterns, our analysis systems are flagging them as theoretically impossible. Yeah, I get that a lot, Echo said conversationally. Look, I just want to make my connecting transport to Rizia Prime. I have reservations at a resort that supposedly has a beach where the sand is made of crystallized starlight, and I've been looking forward to trying that for about 3 years now. You want to go on vacation? THYSS Kavok said slowly, as if the concept of recreational activities was somehow incompatible with someone who apparently engaged in cosmic-level combat as a hobby. Shore leave, technically, but yay. It's been a challenging deployment, and I figured I'd try this relaxation thing that everyone keeps recommending. The processing supervisor stared at her for a long moment, clearly trying to reconcile the image of someone who could apparently punch gods into submission with someone who wanted to lie on a beach made of crystallized starlight. You have personally defeated multiple universe-level threats, and your primary concern is vacation time. Well, that and whether the resort actually has those drinks where they set them on fire first, Echo confirmed. I've heard about those but never actually tried one. THYSS Kavok turned to his technicians with the expression of someone who was beginning to understand why administrative work was considered a form of slow torture in most galactic cultures. What are our processing options? We could classify her as a Class Omega threat herself and require military escort, Clixthana suggested hesitantly. That seems excessive, Echo interjected. Plus, I'm pretty sure your military has better things to do than babysit someone's vacation plans. We could require additional documentation verifying her combat claims, Vox Thaler offered. I've got some souvenirs, Echo said helpfully. Vorthak's crown makes an excellent bottle opener. Very practical. Oh, THYSS Kavok said slowly, we could implement Emergency Protocol 15, unclassifiable individual with demonstrably benign intentions. His technicians exchanged glances. Is that a real protocol, sir? It is now. The processing supervisor looked at Echo, who had maintained an expression of patient courtesy throughout the entire proceeding despite the fact that she could apparently reduce their entire star system to its component particles if the mood struck her. He said finally, do you solemnly promise to refrain from engaging in any divine combat activities during your stay within hegemony space? Echo considered this carefully. I mean, that's the plan. But you know how these things go. Sometimes you're just trying to enjoy a quiet drink, and suddenly some cosmic horror decides to threaten the local sun. What's a person supposed to do? Just ignore it. That would be rude. They just happen. THYSS Kavok repeated weakly. Yeah, occupational hazard. Like, you develop a reputation for solving certain kinds of problems, and then people start calling you whenever they have those problems. It's really more of a customer service issue than anything else. The processing team exchanged the sort of meaningful looks that conveyed approximately 27 different types of bureaucratic display. Right, THYSS Kavok said, making an executive decision that would probably be referenced in administrative training manuals for the next several centuries. Standard transit clearance. Please collect your comprehensive array of military equipment and proceed to departure gate 73. Echo began reassembling her gear with practiced efficiency, each piece clicking into place with a sort of precision that suggested she could probably do this blindfolded during an earthquake. Thanks. Hey, quick question. Do you happen to know if crystallized starlight sand is actually comfortable to lie on, or is it just pretty to look at? I honestly have no idea, THYSS Kavok admitted. Well, I guess that's part of the adventure. She finished securing her equipment and shouldered her rifle. Oh, one more thing. If any universe-level threats show up while I'm gone, you might want to just, file a formal complaint and wait for me to get back. Trying to handle them yourselves probably won't end well. We'll take that under advisement, the processing supervisor said faintly. Echo headed toward the departure terminals, leaving behind a security checkpoint full of beings who were seriously reconsidering their understanding of how the universe worked and whether their employee insurance covered existential crises. So, Clixthana said eventually, should we submit a formal report about this incident? THYSS Kavok stared at the scanner readings one more time, then at the small scorch marks on the floor where Echo had been standing. Apparently, even her casual presence generated enough residual energy to affect the deck plating. You know what? He said finally. Let's classify this as routine human transit processing, no significant incidents. And maybe put in a request for hazard pay adjustment for the entire department, retroactively. What about the threat assessment update? Right. Make a note. Humans, generally harmless when provided with adequate recreational facilities and appropriately exotic vacation destinations. Do not interfere with shore leave plans under any circumstances. As Echo disappeared into the departure area, probably to discover whether drinks that were set on fire lived up to their reputation, the Meridian station security system quietly updated its processing protocols. Somewhere in its vast administrative database, a new entry appeared. Class, Human, Vacation Category. Threat level, theoretically infinite, practically negligible. Special handling, ensure resort reservations are confirmed and transportation runs on schedule. It wasn't the most detailed threat assessment in galactic administrative history, but it captured the essential facts. Sometimes the universe's most dangerous individuals just wanted to try lying on a beach made of crystallized starlight while drinking something that had been set on fire for purely aesthetic reasons. The truly terrifying part, which nobody at Meridian Station was quite ready to acknowledge yet, was that Echo was probably considered fairly typical as far as human military personnel on shore leave were concerned. Somewhere in the departure area, a cheerful announcement echoed through the corridors. Attention passengers. Transport 427 to Rizia Prime is now boarding at Gate 73. We are pleased to announce that the Starlight Beach Resort has confirmed availability of flammable beverages for all guests. The universe, it seemed, had an excellent sense of timing.